Hello, my name is Daniel Ball. I am doing a presentation over the way that psychological and social concepts that we learned this year in social psychology relate to the issues currently being faced by the LGBTQ plus community, both in America and worldwide. So, just to go over the few things that I'm going to talk about today, or at least general baselines for them, we have the introduction that we'll start with here in just a moment. We have the troubles faced by the community, acceptance issues, infighting amongst the community, conformity issues, and we'll go over a brief summary over the topics we talk about today. So, with that in mind, let's get right into it. I will read the beginning of this. To briefly begin, the concept of LGBTQ plus people is rather easy to understand. We have lesbian women who are women that only have interest in women, gay men which are men interested in other men, bisexual people who have either little to no sexual preference between genders, transgender people who do not conform to their gender assigned at birth, hormonally transition due to cognitive dissonance, and queer people who are simply meaning they have more specific nuances of being LGBT that don't fit into generalized groups. To touch on each group specifically very quickly, the lesbian and gay men make up a very large portion of the community, and actually make up, at the moment, currently the largest margin. With that in mind, they do tend to have the issue of not necessarily superiority, but they came before and were much more socially accepted, as well as were the spearheading of the movement back in the early 1950s, 60s. So there is a bit of conflict there. Bisexual people, of course, are actually currently on the rise among Generation Z as the most recognized group of LGBT people, and is growing at the largest rate, actually quite unprecedented, among Gen Z. Queer people, which that specifically more falls in terms of people that deal with, say, they have attraction more to femininity in people as opposed to just women. So say a person, be it male or female, has attraction to womanly women or girly guys, in a sense. Or even non-binary people who tend to be more on the effeminate side. So there's a lot of different nuance when it comes to queer. And of course, transgender people who are currently in the crosshairs of a lot of political issues, given the state of America, and they are the ones who are they are people that have gone through and hormonally transitioned because they actually experience severe cognitive dissonance. And they experience this because in their mind, they themselves are feeling more and more identifying with the opposite gender or a different gender than they were born with, depending on who they identify as. With that in mind, the people that do transition face a lot of cognitive dissonance because of how they are also treated socially. A lot of troubles that come down to the community, as listed here, is transgender acceptance. There is a lot of issues to do with, oh, you'll never be a real woman, or different statements like that are often tossed around by both online trolls and different people in an attempt to actually get transgender people who they view as not really worth even talking to, second-class citizens. And they're trying to get them to perhaps have less self-respect, self-esteem, confidence in themselves. Another big issue is currently we face a lot of religious fanaticism that's being used in the legal system through virtue signaling. Now, what do I mean by that? A lot of virtue signaling, especially when it comes to religious fanatics, comes to the perspective of people that are... Let's take the governor of Florida, for example. He talks a lot about using Christian philosophy in the government to guide his decisions. The problem being, that we have multiple treaties that was signed in the U.S. by previous historic political figures. For example, the Treaty of Tripoli, which would designate that even though this nation was founded by Christians, it is not a Christian nation, which is a very important distinction, as this kind of thing is being used by Christians that are using the face of Christianity as a justification to push harsh and hateful rhetoric. And of course, there is a lack of awareness and care by cisgender and straight people, and it's hard to bring that kind of awareness to these people due to the issues they face with acceptance or wanting to not be discriminated against for simply being different. Now, one of the biggest issues for acceptance is among trans people. Trans people are, in America, very viewed volatilely. Some groups love them and want to protect them. A lot of groups don't care, and a lot of groups even are trying to call for them to be made completely illegal across the U.S. They actually end up suffering the highest amount of cognitive dissonance due to hormonal transitioning, especially in non-supportive groups or cliques. This is due to the fact that a lot of trans people deal with issues with their families not accepting them or being able to process the change that they go through. With that in mind, that leads to a lot of issues with these people going forward. And of course, mental health issues can lead into physical health issues, which can cut their life short or can even lead people to have suicidal tendencies. Lesbian and gay people are, while more societally accepted than trans, bi, and queer people, are still viewed in a poor light by a lot of people, and there's a lot of social stigma around them that tends to bring down their own self-actualization of themselves, their own happiness. And this comes from the fact that there is laws in place, for example, to do with, people that are gay and lesbian are more likely to have STDs, which, while to a marginal degree is true, does not necessarily justify the legal bans that have been placed against them for being able to donate blood to blood banks or sperm banks or what have you. At least among gay men on that last part. And of course, there is the far in between bisexual and queer people. There is actually a huge identity problem with queer and bisexual people, specifically in the modern age, due to how they are viewed. There is a large trope among bisexual people that, you're not bi, you're just X pretending to be this. When in all reality, it's kind of hard to get people, especially in LGBT circles, to realize, well, yes, this person is in, for example, a gay relationship. They are identifying as a man dating another man. They themselves still have interest in both men, women, and other non-binary people. So people will often jump to conclusions and label them as such. Or among queer people, we'll just nearly disregard their existence entirely and try to invalidate the identity that a person has struggled with to finally find acceptance and doing a lot of damage to them long run. And that kind of leads to this, which is infighting. Now, there is, of course, with any group, infighting. But it's particularly a problem in the LGBT community of today because of various political movements. One of the main consequences of this infighting is a lower social standing. Now, while the LGBT people are not necessarily respected for their amount of people that are in parades and whatnot, and while that's a different conversation entirely, it's important to remember that these are people trying to celebrate and be themselves. There is various groups. For example, there is Gays Against Groomers, which is a group that was actually started by a Christian church in Nebraska that was pushing for the LGBT community to get rid of trans people from their name, getting rid of the T from LGBT, in an attempt to divide us, divide LGBT people. And that is because it's kind of the thing where they have to deal with the fact that there is a lot that we can accomplish together as people. There's the group known as Mermaids, which is a feminist lesbian movement, which is pushing for the separation from the LGBT movement. And of course, LGBT, dropping the T, is just a general movement that was started to try to further vilify trans people. This can lead to all sorts of problems. Cognitive dissonance in members from having the issues of not being able to see themselves correctly, not being able to deal with all of this. There's lower self-esteem issues and confidence in other friends and family of the community. And it can generally even lead to physical altercations and violence between members, which is incredibly harmful to them. Conformity issues. On screen you will see this. I have a lot of issues in the LGBT community about conforming to standards. The push is due to identity problems and wanting to be loved and recognized as much as other prevalent straight couples. This comes to be an issue due to the fact that they're wanting to be seen as normal or regular by impartial or uncaring people in society, or even hateful people, that rather than self-actualization and pushing to strive to be their best selves, pushing to be as happy and as at peace with the world as they can be, as opposed to the pursuit of being with people, the pursuit of being recognized and enjoyed by everyone, rather than enjoying themselves. So, to quickly go over what we've talked about a little bit. One of the biggest issues facing the LGBT community these days is cognitive dissonance between members, and just the ability to organize relationships between people. The ability to have people that you know wanting to try to conform to a society that doesn't want them to be a part of them. There's a lot of issues that face the LGBT community in these days. And I made this presentation both for a grade, as well as to go over and discuss social psychological concepts applying to these issues in relative depth. It's important to remember that everyone, no matter how different, is still human, and it's important to not let the media dehumanize a very human set of issues. So with that in mind, we come to the end of the presentation.